I'm John Underwood. Welcome to Backstory, a program that attempts to look behind the headlines at the news and events that affect our lives here in Orange County. Drive down any street today in Orange County and you can see rooftop after rooftop of solar-powered homes. And if you open those garage doors, you'd likely see an electric vehicle or two charging in those garages. All thanks to federal and state solar rebates and subsidies that made it cost-effective for homeowners to go solar, they say. In California, it was the Million Homes Solar Initiative, launched in 2011, that drove the solar boom, to the point that today solar electricity generation from commercial and residential installations provided recently, for the first time, 50% of the state's electrical energy needs. This surge in renewable power in California is a success story by any measure, maybe too successful from the point of view of the electrical grid providers in the state. Southern California Edison among them in this area, who lobbied and achieved from the State Public Utilities Commission recently a partial rollback of the original incentives that drove solar installations and the boom that followed. On July 1, 2017, Edison is authorized to begin enacting new restrictions and levies on solar installations and credits to its customers that all of us here in Orange County will be affected by. It's called Net Metering 2.0, and from the consumer standpoint, there will be some losses, but there may also be some gains. The question is, how much will this new Edison billing formula affect all of us who are now considering going solar on our rooftops and in our garages? Are there still strategies and opportunities for the homeowner, business, and renter groups and co-ops considering solar and electrical vehicle purchases that make dollars and cents for the solar consumer? Today we have in our studio two qualified guests who can break down this question to its essential elements for us, navigate us through the new regulations, and give us a way forward into the hopefully still bright future of solar energy. But first, let's listen to the thoughtful comments of one local Rossmoor resident who did go solar a few years ago and how the experience has fared for him. Robin Yan purchased his 2,200 square foot, almost all-electric home in Rossmoor back in 2011 and almost simultaneously installed solar on his rooftop, motivated by a mix of environmental concerns and high energy bills presented to him by the previous homeowner of over $400. Robin went all in for solar and claims his $21,000 price tag was worth it. Right off the bat, as it paid off for you, are you happy with your solar investment?
Oh yeah, definitely. I got my system right after I bought the house. The previous owner had about a $400 a month bill, and right now I don't pay anything. In fact, the electric utility company pays me.
Okay. All right. Well, you know, that's you entered the market at a very well, some people call it sweet spot, a time when the incentives and the rebates and the tax kickbacks from the federal government were most advantageous for homeowners. And so you feel that this has worked very well for you and your family here?
Yeah, definitely. It's nice not having to pay an electric bill. It's nice having an electric car where all the miles that I drive are completely prepaid and I don't have to worry about it, and it's nice not having to go to a gas station.
At that point, Robin says it made good sense to go forward with the purchase of his first electric vehicle. A good fit, he says, for his workday commute to Whittier. So does it make sense then, once you put solar panels on your roof, I mean, does it make financial sense then to put electric vehicles in your garage?
Oh, definitely, even more so, because for us, we're actually on time of use billing. So the energy that we're collecting during the daytime, we're collecting at a higher rate and we're selling it back to the grid at the higher rate. I charge my car at night when the rate is lower, so it makes a lot of sense for us. With solar panels on his roof, a 220-volt car charging station in his garage, and a central solar inverter panel and energy meter outside,
that he can easily monitor, Robin is able, with little effort, to calculate the amount of electricity he uses and generates back onto the Edison grid. Nevertheless, he says, even he and others who got in on the early incentives are beginning to feel the pinch from Edison in small ways already on their bills. As I mentioned, things are going to change. As of July 1, Edison's going to a net metering 2.0 system of charging customers with solar. And it's not going to be as advantageous as you are afforded and those who got in before July 1 on the grid. Having said that, do you still think it's, for somebody who's getting into the solar game at this point, do you think it would still make sense? If you had to get into the game today, would you still buy in?
Yes, and if I bought my house after, July 1st, I would also get it after that as well. I mean, even in a way, getting the solar system helps protect you from inflation, because as time passes, electric utility prices go up. So even if the incentives aren't as good as they were when we first got it, to me it still makes a lot of sense. It's really nice getting that bill that says 0 on it.
From $400 to $0 of electrical usage on his 2,200 square foot home with a pool is a good feeling every month for Robin Yan when he opens his bills. But as he points out, zeroing out on your bill is not necessarily the only good feeling that comes from going solar. Well, what would you say to folks, given the fewer incentives out there today that you were afforded? What would you say to those people considering entering the solar market for their residential homes?
I would definitely encourage solar. For financial reasons, it may not necessarily make sense to get your bill down to 0, but if you can at least get rid of the top tiers of your bill, you should be saving a lot of money from that at least.
Well, welcome back to the studio, and as we saw, Robin Yan and others who had the good fortune and good timing to get in on solar in the last few years have been able to take advantage of not only the maximum subsidized incentives, but also falling solar panel costs. Well, they call it the sweet spot. But as Robin Yan acknowledges, that sweet spot is slowly diminishing, and as of July 1, a new billing structure for solar electric usage and crediting is rolling out from Edison and is already rolled out from other companies across the state. And here to talk about these coming changes and the broader solar installation picture are two experts in the field who are going to help us sort it all out, hopefully. They are on my left. On my left is Lisa Rosen with Sustainable Electric Solutions out of Pomona, California. Welcome, Lisa. And on my right is Michelle Kinman, Clean Energy Advocate, I think is how you refer to yourself, with Environment California. So hopefully these ladies will be able to help us sort this out. And I want to begin by asking the question with you, Michelle. Since your organization, Environment California, was the lead organization, in fact, wrote much of the language for SB 1 back in 2006 that started the so-called Million Home Initiative, that was initiated by, well, a Republican, Arnold Schwarzenegger, when he was candidate, right? How important was that legislation in kicking this whole solar initiative off?
That was groundbreaking legislation for growing the solar market here in California and serving as an example for other states to follow all across the country. What that did is it put in place a $3.3 billion 10-year rebate program to incentivize customers all across California to go solar, to put solar on their homes, on their schools, on their businesses, on their farms, you name it, and to create this mainstream market for solar power.
Okay. Are we there? Do we have 1 million homes yet?
We don't have 1 million homes, but embedded in the legislation was a goal to get to 3,000 megawatts, which at the time that the legislation passed was what we figured would be the equivalent of 1 million roofs. We have gotten to that 3,000 megawatt mark and exceeded it, even though we don't have as many projects on the ground. The projects that have been built to date have been larger than we had anticipated 10 years ago.
Okay. So by that benchmark, the program's been successful.
Absolutely.
And like I said in my introduction, maybe too successful for some folks. Edison and the other utilities in California are now trying to put the brakes to some extent on that successful program with this so-called net metering 2.0 that we're going to talk about today, and hopefully basically unpack here and determine for people. I want to ask, go back to Robin Yan. Makes the statement, Robin does, in a little B-roll that we saw. Even if I had not been able to get in on the solar boom, so to speak, I would still go solar today because it would be a hedge against the inflation of cost increases and so forth from the utility companies, which, as we all know, are inevitable. Would you both agree that's a true statement? Would you agree with that statement unequivocally, that at least that is true?
It continues to be an excellent investment. The
Does-
other thing is that we would say here is that in 2000, when I installed, there was a subsidy of $4.50 a watt. It costs something like $7 a watt to install. We can install solar now, almost any solar installation, for $3.50 a watt because of all of the reductions in cost. So a system costs less now than it would have cost when Robin installed it, even with the incentives.
Okay.
That's what the policies did.
5 kilowatt
Yep.
system in a typical average house.
You could say $3.50 a watt for installation.
What does that mean? I mean, how does that add up for an 1,800 square foot house?
We don't talk in terms of the size of the house or the size of the bill. We talk in terms of the size of the system.
5 kilowatt.
5 kilowatt system, multiply that times 350 and you get your average cost. 5,000 times 350.
18,000?
That's right.
Your company, Sustainable Solutions, has been on the forefront, really, of the environmental movement in many different respects, sustainable energy, various kinds over the decades, really. Your husband, Doug Kortoff, is literally a pioneer in the electric vehicle movement and other sustainable energy initiatives. Glad to see that you are carrying the flag for the family. So you guys have been involved in this. Your company up in Pomona has been involved at the ground level with installations and with consulting with groups and with individual homeowners. So you know very intimately what it takes to get a project off the ground. Has it gotten any easier?
No. In a word. In terms of the equipment, in terms of the actual installation, each year there are material improvements, there are financial improvements, there's better equipment out there, more reliable stuff, more information on the internet. In terms of the process, it continues to be challenging. At times there are improvements and things become more streamlined. The city of Los Angeles, for instance, made it possible to pull most solar and electrical permits online. If you follow their format, if you adhere to their guidelines, you're good to go. Other cities that have been solar friendly have made other efforts to codify and describe what is necessary in order to successfully permit and install a system. Other agencies have bogged down in increasingly esoteric regulations, I would say. And the state has made a sincere effort, and the legislature has made a sincere effort to address it, but there are ever so many permitting authorities and inspection authorities throughout the state. The fire departments have weighed in over the last several years about their needs for fire suppression and fire safety that have complicated installations considerably.
So the problem is not at the legislative level necessarily, though your organization continues to push for a number of different initiatives in Sacramento. It sounds like the problem is really at the jurisdictional level.
Yes.
That's where the rubber meets the road. The problems that can be put in people's way, am I saying that properly, to obstruct possibly the forward motion of large-scale residential solar installation. Would you go that far?
Large or small. I tell potential customers that we can probably install most systems in 3 days or so. But I caution them that depending on the jurisdiction, the permitting, installation, and inspection process may take 6 months or more.
Okay. Michelle, you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I think
Negative
that there,
view?
I think there's plenty actually that can still be done at all levels of government to make sure that we have forward-looking policies to incentivize more people to go solar. So that's the federal government, the state government, and local government. In terms of local government specifically, from my vantage point, I think, I just got back from San Diego recently where I was able to stand with Mayor Faulconer there and award San Diego as the #1 solar city in the country. They have more installed solar than any other city in the United States. And if you unpack that a little bit and think about how did San Diego get to this point, it's not just that they have a lot of sunshine, and that's not just that California has a lot of sunshine, it's the policies that are in place. And so I think that shows us that there's a lot that mayors and other local officials can do to set a tone. They can set ambitious goals for their cities, as in San Diego, where they have a goal to get to 100% renewable energy by 2035. That sends a strong signal to customers in San Diego to invest now in solar energy. And that's just one of many things that I think local actors can do on this stage.
So what can we do here in Orange County, here in Los Alamitos, where our studios currently we're broadcasting from? What can we do here in our local jurisdictions to promote better solar? We know that a large percentage of the costs of solar installations now, and according to some documentation, it's up as much as 2/3 of solar costs now are non-hardware costs, permitting process, zoning fees, fire safety fees, installation costs, labor, and so forth. So as much as 2/3 are not the panels themselves or the inverter that is used to collect the energy. It's charges for infrastructure, basically. What can we do about that? I mean,
there's plenty
is
that
this
can
an
be done at the
immutable,
local level. Yeah, there's plenty of things that can be
Okay.
done at the local level. Everything from streamlining the permitting costs, which get at some of the costs that you're talking about, to having municipal governments lead the way by putting solar on government buildings, to setting ambitious solar energy goals for their cities and really showing that a signal to their customers, to their residents, to their businesses, that solar is the wave of the future.
Lisa, you mentioned a little bit ago in the conversation, a little earlier on, that the city of Los Angeles was incentivizing solarization by putting all of their solar permitting online. Is that right? Did I get that right?
They made it possible to get an express permit online. If you read their guidelines and you're familiar with their process, you can pull a permit in a day.
Okay, well, jumping right in with net metering 2.0, as we said, this is the new rollout, the agreement that the utility companies, and in our case Edison, has struck with the Public Utilities Commission to create a new level of billing status for solar initiatives, solar rooftop installations, beginning July 1st. So that's going to be right on top of us. It's going to affect all of us out there. Net metering 2.0 essentially has some pluses and some minuses. I want to get right into what those might be for aspiring solar customers who are thinking about going solar in the months to come. Net metering 2.0. According to Susanna Churchill of San Francisco organization Vote Solar, has sent me an interesting breakdown of the pluses and minuses of net metering 2.0. I'd like to go through that with both of you and just get your comments on what you think, if you in fact agree, or if there are some embellishments you'd like to present, or just simply disagree with her assessment from Vote Solar in San Francisco, a similar organization to yours, Michelle, down here in LA. And Ms. Churchill says the pluses for net metering 2.0 coming at us on July 1 and our billing statements for those who are contemplating going solar. The pluses are that larger net metering entities will be able to receive benefits for solar in larger amounts of sizes. In other words, megawatt sizes. Now, we're not talking about a solar rooftop on top of your roof, but maybe your church group, maybe your local hospital, maybe your school, maybe your daycare center or your youth center might be interested in perhaps even close to megawatt size of installations. Supposedly, according to Vote Solar in San Francisco, net metering 2.0 will open that up for people. There is also something called virtual net metering, where the new Public Utility Commission authorized billing process will remove a utility imposed roadblock to something called virtual net metering, which will allow, theoretically, multifamily units, apartment buildings, perhaps HOAs, homeowners associations, to be able to collectively put their individual solar panels together under one server or a delivery point and be able to essentially co-op and deliver energy back to the grid and take advantage of returning energy to the grid. Another potential advantage she talks about is this idea of expanding solar access for residential customers in disadvantaged communities. They claim that is coming in very short order in the next year or two. Those are the advantages. Let's stop there. Perhaps I could get you both to comment on those three presumed positives.
Yes. As a conservationist, those possibilities are exciting, and that if the state is to move forward on its very ambitious renewable goals, a significant part of that will have to be done with large projects. And this particular aspect addresses the need for those large projects. It remains to be seen how that will affect the individual consumer, or the people who have solar, or the people who are contemplating solar. Nevertheless, I remain very optimistic. On the whole, fixing your cost, buying your equipment, owning your energy independence is a powerful thing to do economically and for a lot of other reasons, as I think our customers discover.
Okay. Michelle, what's your perspective on these first so-called advantages of net metering 2.0 coming at us?
I agree with Susanna Churchill that those are all advantages, and I think it's important to remember that as exciting as the growth of solar has been over the course of the past decade or so, it's still a very small amount of the energy that we're using on a regular basis. There's a lot of room for growth, and so I'm excited about all of these tweaks that will make it possible for more Californians to go solar. And in fact, so many of us do live in multifamily units or have roofs that aren't suitable for solar for one reason or another, and so it's exciting that there's another option available now to customers through virtual net metering.
Okay, well, as I mentioned in the introduction, it's possible to reach that 50% because we did reach that 50% for a very small moment in time.
Right.
But it shows that we could do it with a combination of commercial and residential. Supposedly, the way it broke down was about 39% of California's energy, renewable energy was provided by commercial, and the rest was residential that tipped us over the 50% point for about a minute. But it just shows that it can be done, I guess.
Absolutely.
But you're both in agreement that where it's going to happen is going to be on the commercial or industrial side?
I think that that's going to have big benefits in the long run for the total picture of renewables. There is some carryover to the residential side, because if there's a robust industry for installing, if there's a robust industry in terms of pricing of products, the residential customer will benefit both from the cost of the electricity that's produced and from their ability to obtain that equipment for themselves should they want to do it.
Okay.
And I would actually disagree. I think that we need all sectors involved. If we're going to get to California's existing mandate to get to 50% renewables by 2030, and there are plenty of folks already talking, including Environment California, about the need to get to 100% renewable energy before mid-century, then we need all hands on deck. And so we need the commercial systems, we need the utility scale, and we definitely need the residential scale as well. Not only to hit those numbers, but I think there's also something to be said for seeing solar taking place in your community and recognizing that this is something that you as an individual, as a Californian, are partaking in this clean energy revolution.
Yeah, it seems to me that and I'm sure that the utility companies would like to see a concentration of these mega panel farms out in the desert, out, on your way to Las Vegas, you can see them on the side of the road. I'm sure that's where they would like to take it. But is there an advantage? I guess what you're saying is there's an advantage in people having a dog in the fight, on top of their own roofs. That it builds a kind of a sense of partnership, perhaps.
And it's not only that, it's also the grid stability that it adds, so that if we're not reliant on just a handful of generating systems, but we've got solar being generated on rooftops, 1 million plus all across the state, that helps to stabilize our energy sources.
My electrical friends with more technical expertise than I say that if you have distributed electrical generation, you have a much more stable grid than if you have generation at a distant point that all has to be imported by transmission lines. Anecdotally, we saw that a couple of times when there were major outages in some of the Los Angeles DWP areas, in areas where we had actually installed a number of solar installations. All around them, the power would have failed, but in those particular neighborhoods we noticed the power was not disrupted. There were not those failures. So distributed electricity has, from technical points of view, those small residential things actually serve to stabilize the grid, and they actually cost less money in terms of infrastructure because you already have an infrastructure there to support them.
Okay, all good reasons to go solar out there. Now here are the reasons not to, according to Miss Churchill from Vote Solar in San Francisco. There are some downsides, as we mentioned earlier, and they include something called non-bypassable charges. This is new for Net Metering 2.0, which rolled out on July 1 of 2017. Non-bypassable charges were applicable to all new solar customers who hook up to the grid as of July 1. Even if you send energy back to the grid equal to how much you've used, you're still going to have these bypassable charges. Beyond that, help me out and help our viewers out there and explain what non-bypassable charges are and how it will affect the everyday customer, the solar user, residential.
Yeah, I can take a start at that. It is a very wonky policy term, and the solar industry is fraught with those, I'm afraid. But what non-bypassable charges are charges that the customer accrues on a monthly basis, and they are charges that cover things like programs to invest in energy efficiency or programs to help with low-income ratepayers on their bills. And so in the past, under Net Metering 1.0, solar customers were only assessed the non-bypassable charges on their net energy bill. Going forward, solar customers will be charged those non-bypassable charges on any electricity that they consume from the grid. So it's all very technical, but the bottom line is that the averages that are anticipated would be that your average solar customer would have an additional $6 to $8 on their monthly bill. So it's not as sweet of a deal as Net Metering 1.0, but it's still not changing the economics of solar to the point where it's not something you wouldn't want to do.
Okay, so your answer to non-bypassable charges was, hey, it's $6 to $8 a month. I know some friends have done some calculations and say, no, it's not going to be $6 to $8 a month. Now they have 8 kilowatt systems, so he's calculating at 15 or 20 bucks a month. But is that the differential?
It very well could be.
Okay.
I mean, if you're going to have a larger size system.
But you have
larger
another
costs.
reservation about non-bypassable charges. I really want to kind of unpack just what these charges represent, what they mean, because these are not charges that were heretofore charged in net metering 1.0. This is presumably something new.
I would say the most interesting and challenging has yet to be fully unveiled, and that is the charge for the energy you use. Under the original concept of net metering, you were allowed to swap the energy you made during the peak hours for the energy you used during all the other hours.
Right.
And you could get that additional energy at no additional charge. Eventually they added a connection charge, which is standard for every net metering customer now. And it makes sense from a structural point of view. The new charge says, though, they're going to charge you a certain, as yet unspecified amount for the amount of energy you do use. It's not going to be a complete offset. They're going to charge you for some of that delivered energy that you call up from the grid. It's possible that your time of use rate will offset that amount, but it's not clear until the rates and the amounts are unveiled what the relationship will be with that. So if you want to get a good calculation of the economics of it, it's going to be rather difficult to analyze, particularly since once they have the right to have a charge, they can petition, and probably will, regularly to increase that rate. As you know, the utilities are allowed to increase their rates based on approval of costs by the Public Utilities Commission, which governs the amount of profit they can make. So that particular charge is worrisome to anybody who thinks about it unless it's very well specified. What will that charge be? The final charge is a fairly simplistic and basic charge, and that's the application and connection fee charge, and that's going to be charged to every customer. It's interesting that in Edison territory, the amount has been set at $75. Whether you have a 1 kilowatt system or a system just anything under 1 megawatt, it's going to be $75, which seems to me kind of an odd burden to place on the little guy. But then they went ahead and did that. It's not a huge amount, but their reasoning there puzzles me.
I guess the silver lining behind this $75 charge, which every they're going to call it interconnection fee, imposed on every net metering 2.0 new customer as of July 1. It's half as much as San Diego. We could say that.
It's minuscule, and it's non-repeating. It's a one-time charge.
But the bill itself, I mean, you're a professional in the field, been in the renewable energy, sustainable energy industry for over a decade, maybe 2, 3 decades even, with your husband, Doug. Do you understand your Edison bill completely? Do you know what these charges are?
No. I try to advocate and interpret for my customers, who are many, what their bills mean. And therefore, I have a powerful incentive to try to stay abreast of the changes. But Edison is able to change its bill faster than I can research what the individual components mean. Basically, what I make of it is their business model is to break down their costs and to charge customers for their energy consumption based on the breakdown of the charges. There are, if you look at your bill, a huge number of charges per kilowatt hour that you use.
Michelle, let me prevail on you. Do you have any idea what these non-bypassable charges are likely to be? Do you know any
Some
of them?
of the programs that are included in non-bypassable charges are programs that are to help fund Edison's energy efficiency programs, for instance, or the ability for low-income ratepayers to pay a lower rate. There's also a nuclear decommissioning charge that's packed in there as part of the non-bypassable charges, and a few other items.
Do you know what the other items are? Can you put a finger on?
There is something called the
handle,
DWR
name?
bond rate and some sort of transition charge. So I'm not familiar with the details of all of those, but the The takeaway is that it's expected to average out to about $6 to $8 on a ratepayer's monthly bill.
Additionally. Okay. Well, so even for you, some of those charges are yet to be determined or somewhat inscrutable and perhaps unable to be determined. But we do know what nuclear decommissioning charge means, and I presume that refers to San Onofre, the nuclear power plant, Edison's
Yes.
plant down in San Clemente that is now darkened, has been darkened for some time now, and they're trying to figure out what to do with not only with the plant but now with the nuclear waste. So I guess the ratepayer is on the hook for that one, huh?
Yes.
Okay, so at least we know what one of those charges is going to be, nuclear decommissioning at San Onofre. So, well, you talked about the interconnection fees, and so that's not such a bad deal. One-time interconnection fee for solar, residential solar hookups. I guess we could swallow that. But there's one negative left that Ms. Churchill talks about, and that's something called time of use rate schedule. Now, under Net Metering 2.0, anybody hooking up to the grid with their solar panels on their homes are going to be paying a rate schedule based on time of use. I'll open it up to the table. Anybody want to take a stab of what time of use means and how to explain that to our beloved viewers?
Well, time of use was one of Douglas's favorite, my husband Douglas's favorite topics with respect to solar and renewable energy. Because if you look at energy use in California, it peaks on work days in the afternoon. But at night, even on the same day, it would fall down, it would be less than half than that, sometimes even a third. And it meant if you were a solar customer, you were generating most of the solar that you were going to generate during times when you would be paid the maximum amount for it. So you would bank up this credit for the maximum amount. I believe at one time it was 43 cents a kilowatt hour. And off-peak was something like 13 cents a kilowatt hour. So you could generate all the electricity you were going to use and get credit for 43 cents a kilowatt hour. And then you could use electricity and get billed 13 cents a kilowatt hour for it. The first thing that changed was that the time of use hours were switched. It continued to be weekdays, but the utility engineers calculated that there was more usage at the end of the day than they had originally calculated, and they persuaded the Public Utility Commission that peak use should now be from like 11 to 6, and then later it was changed from 11 to 8. If you're a solar customer, you're not going to benefit anymore from that 11 to 8. In fact, you're going to pay dearly for your electricity if you go home and use your electric stove to cook dinner and your dishwasher to wash dishes during those peak hours.
So it sounds like the smart consumer who was able to basically work the time of use system so that in net metering 1.0 anyway, where they could send power back to the grid, could zero out their usage essentially, and that's how guys like Rob and Yan would end up with a zero bill, so to speak. And under time of use, they've broadened out the period of time, made it less possible for the consumer to be able to take advantage of sending energy back to the grid via their solar system. Do I have that right?
Exactly. Also, there are some other factors to consider with time of use. At the time when we began installing solar, if you had a system that produced 2/3 of your electricity, 66% of your electricity, you could still zero out your bill economically, because the economics of it were that favorable. That certainly would be less so the case now. And there are additional tiers and additional language that's been introduced into the evaluation of your individual consumption that makes it almost impossible in terms of pure gobbledygook for me to tell any consumer exactly what their bill is. So people who are very precise in their economics, who want to look at a time of use electrical bill and understand, what does this mean to me? They're likely to be extremely frustrated.
Actually, if I could just add on to
Yeah,
that, I think it's
please.
important background also to know that already the majority of commercial customers are on time of use rates, and all ratepayers who have all customers will be going over to time of use rates in California in 2019. And so what Net Metering 2.0 does is it accelerates that timeline for all solar customers. And so they will be coming onto time of use rates immediately.
Yeah.
So I would just say that Edison is in not deliberately making the bills as confusing as possible. It is making the bills confusing to us by analyzing in great and profuse detail all of their costs, so that in terms of shifting the costs to the people who should pay them, or the people they think should pay them, their objectives are clearly laid out on the bill. Anything they can go after the customer on, they do, and that's how their bills are structured. That's not user-friendly. That's business-friendly.
Well, that may be the MO of the utility companies, but every consumer out there watching this show is probably making his own calculation as to how he will be able to game the system that's gaming him. And one way, perhaps it's off in the distance a little bit, but coming along is another, what some people call game changer. And that's the use of stored batteries to be able to utilize, to be able to store energy in typical batteries. And if it's a system like Tesla provides, a battery that you can place in your home, it's the same batteries they put in their automobiles, just stacked in array, and store energy at home and utilize that stored energy during those so-called high usage hours, those peak hours in the afternoon and evening when they want their air conditioning on and so forth. Do you see this as a strategy, a real strategy for folks, either one of you, that might be in the offing for customers to fight back with?
Initially, the battery backup systems were the province of people who either couldn't get connected to the grid, couldn't afford the connection fees, and needed a standalone system, or people who, for one reason or another, absolutely, for ideological reasons or for health reasons or for some economic reason, had to have a system that was even more infallible than the grid. More recently, battery backup systems have become attractive in the business sense, because one of the escalating costs that we haven't even hinted at tonight is what's called demand charges. If you're a business, you get hit with demand charges. The electric company keeps track in 15-minute increments of what's the most power you ever use during one 15-minute increment. And your entire bill for the whole year is going to be based on that. So if you have a fleet of trucks with rechargeable equipment and all your fleet of trucks pulls in, and you charge all of that rechargeable equipment, and you have a sky-high charge, it doesn't matter that you make 10 times as much power as you use during that one time. The electric company has to plan for maximum use. Their planners have to allot for maximum use. They have to have that capacity. And so they are allowed to charge their business customers based on that possible demand that they might impose on the system at any moment. And every single kilowatt hour that you use, if you're a business, is based on that. Elon Musk clearly has that plan in mind.
Tesla.
So there are a number of companies, not just Tesla, that are looking in terms of pairing with solar for businesses that want to control their electrical costs by addressing the demand charges, which up until the batteries came along to a certain state of readiness, that was not available. For residential consumers, I suspect it will be more a matter of, again, the energy independence theme and the idea of producing and making all their own power. I had thought in the beginning that that would not be a powerful motivation, but it has been my experience that once people begin making their own power, they take a certain joy in doing so that is even more than just the economic consequences.
Well, yes. However, having said that, for most people, the economic consequences are the major driver.
Initially,
their heart is in their pocketbook usually.
absolutely.
But I know a gentleman, for example, that is jumping on the recent incentives that are available to folks in the residential folks who want to put in a battery storage system. And by the way, whether you have solar or not, there are these incentives out there for you to be able to do that. He's going to do just that. Can this possibly catch on?
Absolutely. So I think one of the things that we haven't really talked about today, but is very important and is my entry point into this whole conversation as an environmental advocate, is the fact that we are facing a climate crisis. And we know from scientists that we need to transition to a zero carbon future, both our electricity and our transportation, by mid-century. And so if we're going to get there, and if we're going to hit California's already existing goals and some of the goals that are being talked about for 100% renewable energy down the line, we need all of these things in play. We need solar power, we need electric vehicles, and we need the battery storage, and they work together. And so it's very important that there are some existing funds to incentivize energy storage for individual consumers. I would argue there's not enough funding for those programs right now, and to that end, Environment California, in full disclosure, is actually sponsoring legislation right now that would create a program somewhat akin to the Million Solar Roofs program in its intent to incentivize a mainstream market for energy storage and really put some serious dollars towards making energy storage more affordable for people so that we can quickly put all of these pieces into play.
Is it likely? I mean, that's a very generous incentive program that my friend has stumbled upon. And I do mean he stumbled upon it because he was not getting any help from Edison in identifying this incentivized program for battery storage system in his home. I imagine once it gets going, that Edison will attempt once again to go back to the PUC and basically have it minimized or curtailed or obfuscated or essentially bureaucratized out of existence. Are you anticipating that? I mean, are you gearing up for that fight?
So where my attention is at is a little bit different, I think, because I am not going to spend all of my time trying to guess what is in the minds of our investor-owned utilities or all of our utilities, but rather what I find encouraging and where I spend my time focusing right now is on the fact that California's decision makers, our governor, our legislature, have made a commitment to energy storage as part of a larger move towards renewable energy. And so I know that we have that commitment and we need our leaders to stay strong on that. And I think that there are individual policies that we're going to need to put in place to make sure that that commitment is realized. But the fact that we have that strong commitment, all the way from the top down, is really something that California can be proud of, and I think bodes well for the future of this burgeoning energy storage market. California right now has a leadership role in energy storage, but it's a young market, and to firm up that leadership role, we really need to invest now.
Who are our energy initiative leaders in Sacramento today? I mean, people would like to know, who can they write to? Who can they lobby with to move things forward? Not only with the, battery systems subsidies, but to continue solar subsidies and continue to make it worthwhile to incentivize folks to go solar.
Well, the good news is I could take up your whole program talking about a lot of different people who have their hand in this issue and are working hard and are champions. But a couple of people do come to mind. And again, starting from the top, Governor Brown has been a big champ for renewable energy and, in fact, signed legislation that directed the PUC to ensure that the rooftop solar market would continue over the long run, and so thwarted the utility attempts to get away, to do away with net metering, and led to this balanced compromise of net metering 2.0 that is still going to allow solar to be a good economic deal for consumers here in California. So certainly starts with Governor Brown. We have seen also tremendous leadership from Senate Pro Tem Kevin DeLeon, who has been engaged in this issue on a number of different levels. A couple of things that come to mind is that he was the author of the legislation that mandates that California will get to 50% renewable energy by the year 2030, and he now has legislation that he is working to get California to 100% renewable energy. So those are two leaders who come immediately to mind. There are, of course, many other folks who are working on the energy storage piece, who are working on electric vehicles.
Lisa, do you agree that this movement needs to be directed? That Michelle talks about the importance of leadership at the top. Is that where it's going to come from?
I don't think we can underestimate the significance of that. There are many different warring factions in any movement like this. Any type of dramatic technological change leads to upheaval for various people and institutions, and without leadership we all fall to squabbling, and with good leadership we end up with policies that are very helpful. I think the robust state of the solar industry in California today is due in no small part to extraordinarily good policies. From the beginning, the plan was to subsidize the industry, but to withdraw the subsidies as the industry progressed. We now are in a state where, in terms of solar, there's almost no subsidy, but the cost is comparable or less to what it was 10 years ago. And the quality, because of the policymakers, the quality of the products and the quality of the industry is phenomenal. It is quite a contrast with the solar boom and bust that happened during the 70s and 80s, which was a solar water heating boom and bust. There was lots of subsidy, there was lots of interest, there were ever so many houses that had solar hot water heating on their roof, and the quality control was nil for both the equipment and the installations, and it was a bust in no time at all. We're still taking the last few remnants of those pieces of equipment off people's roofs. It didn't have to be that way. But good policy, good leadership are critical to making programs like this work for a very, very diverse population.
But it sounds like what you're also saying is that at the other end of the spectrum, it's important that the installers, the folks that are on the ground level, it's important that there be that follow through, that technical know-how. The solar industry has created thousands of jobs, particularly in California. And we've seen in Nevada, when they took away their incentivized programs, a lot of people lost their jobs. I don't think California wants to be Nevada. I think one of the turnoffs today is the intense pitchman environment that, there's a solar company on every other block now. And I think people are feeling a little bit pressured, like they're on a used car lot, buying a used car. And do you see that as part of the downside on the market right now? The market has been in a bit of a down cycle in the last few months. The solar market. I mean, you think it's possible people are just being turned off by the pitch?
I would say that we've seen tremendous growth in the solar industry. So of course you're going to hear about solar more often. We now have over 100,000 Californians employed full-time in the solar industry, and that's an impressive number. I do think that it's important to go back to something you said, which was that you don't think that the way of Nevada is the way California is going to go because we're just a different kind of state. But in fact, we faced that very real threat just a couple of years ago with the utilities here in California wanting to end net metering. And it wasn't happenstance that we didn't go the route of Nevada. In fact, we saw a groundswell of support from Californians all across the state standing up in support of rooftop solar. Environment California was a part of a broad coalition of organizations that included environmental voices, consumer voices, public health voices, educators, faith-based organizations, solar industry entities who all came together and delivered to the Public Utilities Commission over 150,000 petitions from average Californians in support of strong net metering. And that's tremendous. The Public Utilities Commission is not an entity that typically gets on most people's radar screens and does not typically get a lot of mail from Californians. And that was by far the largest amount of petitions they'd ever received on any one topic. And I go into that because I think that's really important. That speaks to the fact that Californians want solar power going forward. And so it's not just that we are some in an amorphous way different than Nevada. It's really shown in the actions of Californians, and we need to remain vigilant because it is, against the utilities' business models as they're structured today for people to generate their own solar. And so it's really something we need to stay on top of as Californians to make sure that we have these policies that will not disrupt the growth of the solar industry going forward.
Yeah. Well, I think you both have essentially said pretty much the same thing, but in a little different way, that it's on us as a state to make it happen, not to rely on the utility companies to make our choices for us.
As citizens
Absolutely.
and as consumers, we make choices and decisions, responses every day that shape the world we live in much more than we know. As a conservationist, and particularly as an electric car driver, I become increasingly aware of that every year.
Okay. I'm afraid we're going to have to stop it there because I think we've covered the basics and probably just the basics today. But I think we've given some folks out there a lot to think about in the upcoming months with the new rollout of net metering 2.0 and what that means to consumers. So I guess the takeaway is it still makes sense to go solar.
Yes, go
There
solar.
are good reasons.
Okay, all right. Well, we'll have to leave it at that. However, at the end of the show, we'll provide for you folks out there some contact information, some links, and certainly some links to Lisa Rosen's organization, Sustainable Electric Solutions, and Michelle Kinman, Environment California. And we hope to see great things up in Sacramento, coming out of Sacramento from your organization, as we've seen in the past. And Lisa, I know without reservation that you will continue to carry the flag for sustainable energy solutions into the future. And I thank you both for taking the time and sitting in our hot little studio and giving folks some idea of what the future of solar in California will be and what to expect from net metering 2.0 in the future. So with the credits, stay tuned for those links and those contacts with organizations that can help you decide if going solar makes sense for you. Thank you very much, and for Backstory, I'm John Underwood.